Well, today the Medical Image Radio Council is talking about a subject that we don't intend it to be controversial, but by nature of it is somewhat controversial only because of, I guess you might say, the fallacy of language that, what words mean to one person doesn't necessarily mean the same. And contextually, that's true in terms of what era you're talking about. And unfortunately, I've had the wisdom of many of our other members here. I'm Jay Garlitz, AA4FL is my radio call sign, the facilitator for today's discussion. Usually this is held jointly on the radio and also by Zoom. Today we're just having the discussion on Zoom because of a radio contest and very busy radio frequency. Thank you for everybody that's listening to the presentation and for those of you that are interactively participating in the forum. Genocide and medical ethics, it's here the discussions by individuals who have a passion for amateur radio and health-related issues, and we guide these forums by facilitators. Now, we do have a PowerPoint, as we're all seeing, since today is exclusively a Zoom session, and the slides that have active links are going to be available on request. So that's something that we'll distribute to our own members, but if you're a member of the public, feel free to contact the last slide here. Well, the last discussion we'll talk. I'll give you a way to get a hold of me for an email address. The comments here are made are not the opinion of Medical Image Radio Council. Let's make that clear. It's just a framework for discussion forum on the topic. And it's not medical advice if we're talking about a particular topic that is medically related. Today, not so much. In a way, medical ethics it is, but they're certainly not political opinions of the organization. And even comments made during the forum, even though they're of a personal nature, consider it within the context of the conversation, not an overtly political discussion, or that's not the intent here. And the web page images that are on this presentation are available to the public. So the links are provided for you because actually it's in the public domain. Now, as we talk about genocide, and I'm no expert on genocide, you're exposed to the media and what you read, not just the media that's on television, but books and such. And your interpretation, what the term means is probably very personal, but genocide as a term, from what I saw in the research that I did, really didn't exist till the late 1940s after World War II. Now, genocide has existed, it seems like, since antiquity, since the beginning of humanity. But after World War II, it seemed to step up to another level of definition, but it's been part of warfare. So some of us earlier got together and talked about the image as we vetted the subject. And, we realized that today we're focusing more on the modern era of, certainly medicine. The last 150 years where we've been able to talk about this in a different light than years ago, when it really didn't involve medical ethics, because it was so widespread, it wasn't even defined as genocide. It's almost like it was just ingrained in society, part of warfare at that time, being that it went all the way back in antiquity. When you go into starting to describe things by words, as it is in the modern day, and you start looking at definitions, you can see where, and I think there's a whole division of philosophy called the fallacy of language, whereas, the words don't have a philosophical meaning, but they don't necessarily mean the same thing to everybody. So after World War II, the UN did form a commission on this, a convention on it, and talked about what genocide actually is. Any of the following acts with an intent to destroy, whole in part, of a national, ethical, racial, or religious group as such, killing members of a group, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group, deliberately inflicting on a group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction. Now, in whole or in part, imposing measures intended to prevent births within a group, forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. So as we start to discuss this today, we can see those words are so broad and they can be interpreted in so many different ways by different people that have different views or different intent. what's genocide to one may not be considered genocide to another. I mean, look where it talks about prevent births within a group. Does that mean abortion is genocide? I mean, that's not the way everybody views it. So just realize this can be very controversial. We're not intended to be controversial, but even think about in our own country, as we look back to some of the studies that were done on STDs that was covered in the previous audio, which we'll give the link for here today, as we talked about World War II and medical ethics during that era, the 1940s and 50s. But what about the Spanish conquistadors years ago, unintentionally and intentionally through their actions? We know what they did intentionally, but unintentionally, what about things like smallpox and measles and the effect that had on big segments of the population? The American Indians, what was done to them as a people, even things as simple as introducing alcohol into their societies, something that they weren't used to. I mean, all these things could be viewed in a certain way towards meeting these descriptions. So this is a forum. Before I move on to the next slide, would anybody like to make comments towards that end? Let me know here. We'll go ahead and give you the mic. No, no one else? Okay, make sure you unmute if you want to talk to me about wanting to speak, guys.
I just wonder whether we should include in genocide intention.
And that's a very good point, Jerry, because the next slide talks about intent. What's the slide? Yeah, here it is. The mental element, in addition to those physical elements, the 5 acts we talked about, is the intent to destroy in the whole or part of national, ethnical, racial, or religious group as such. So in this is only Article 1 of a genocide convention that could take place in the context of the arms. You can read it here. We're not on the air. You see the slides. And that was taken right from this page from the United Nations. Go ahead, Jerry. You want to further expand?
No, I just thought that might be a possibility of why we should limit genocide and all the definition of genocide, and whether genocide should include perhaps destruction of the culture rather than just the people.
Yeah, thank you, Jerry. I wonder if ethnical, do you think that might be the word that ties into culture?
I think so, but there are cultures that are perhaps political rather than ethnic.
I see. Thank you for pointing that out. You know, what also comes to mind, Jerry, some of these terms that sort of parallel genocide. What about ethnic cleansing? I mean, what does that mean? Is that an ethical comment or ethnic cleansing? I mean, is it something that's parallel, or is it just what's a different way of describing genocide to maybe separate it from what happened during World War II? What do you think about that, Jerry?
I think that ethnic cleansing is a euphemism to make it more acceptable, in the same way that politically we have people who are on, let's say, 2 political sides, and yet they don't confront exactly what's happening on the opposite side. They use diplomatic terms to make it more acceptable.
Point well taken. Bill, you're unmuted. Did you want to say something, Bill? KC9CS? No. Anybody else want to make a comment before I move on? It's a forum. I look forward to everybody's views. And, you know, we're recording this session as a forum for our members who weren't here to directly participate today. And we'll continue the dialogue in our electronic media and in our ether. So, you know, here you go again, Jerry, you know, on the intent. That's the most difficult element to determine. So how do you constitute genocide? There has to be proven intent on the part of perpetrators to physically destroy national, ethnical, racial, religious group, and cultural destruction alone should not suffice, nor does an intent to simply disperse a group. And that's an interesting discussion that's in the news today, actually. It is the special intent that makes the crime so unique. In addition, the case law has been associated intent with the existence of a state, organizational plan, or policy, even if the definition does not include that element. I see we have Azif with us. Thank you, Azif, for joining us. I know you're up in North Carolina. Could you please remind me of your call sign, Azif?
Yes, can you hear me, please?
Oh, we hear you beautifully.
Oh, good. I'm W4, Echo Mike Delta.
Thank you for joining us. I'm glad you were able to get the link.
Yes, I had been unable to catch you guys on the HF frequency, so I decided to join on the web meeting. So somehow the propagation, even though we are supposed to be on the top of the solar 25 cycle, but I think the cycle moves from area to area. So it doesn't always work like that.
QSL is we with Winter Field Day, the QRM was so bad, we decided to just go Zoom only on. So thank you for being here. We appreciate that. So we've been recording this, and it'll be available as a video for you to review later. The part you missed. We're picking up with genocide now, and what is genocide, and potentially this could be a very controversial subject. And today we're really going to be looking at it in a much more broad, just forum type of way. We're not coming to any determinations on our own, but we certainly want to hear the different points of view. So importantly, the victims of genocide, they're deliberately targeted, not randomly, because of their real or perceived membership in one of the four groups protected under the convention. And it says it excludes political groups, according to that, Jerry, in a follow to our conversation. It means that the target of destruction must be the group as such and not its members as individuals. Genocide can be committed against only a part of the group as long as that part is identifiable, like a geographically limited area and substantial. So I can think of situations where, and we'll talk about them later, where that's happening currently in the world right now. So that's from the United Nations.
I think you might be able to give a definition and say that there's a specific requirement to meet the definition of genocide, but that there can be conditions that are noted as non-intentional genocide, which has the same effect.
Yeah, I mean, it fluxes so much. I guess that makes it the hard part here of what we talked about, that fallacy of language. What one thing means to one group of people is not necessarily what it means to the next. But into the physician fold here, talking about the ADA Code of Medical Ethics, talking about the Hippocratic Oath, we're really talking about patient-physician relationships here. So we're not talking about genocide unless you directly participated in that formation of what's considered to be genocide, which we know has happened. I mean, it wasn't just Nazi Germany. In looking through a few additional online descriptions, there were doctors apparently during the Armenian genocides in the early part of the 20th century that participated. And it doesn't really go into the name, but there is apparently an academic article, which I wasn't able to obtain. It was called Doctors in the Armenian Bosnian Genocides by Robert Kaplan. And it was published in Health History 2016. I did not read the article. You're welcome to try to Google it. You'd have to be part of an educational institution because it's only the abstract that was online. Another abstract, which at least gave us more specific, was Genocide in Bosnia, the case of Dr. Radovan Kardzik from Bosnia Herzegovina. The issues with the Bosnian Serbs, Croats, and Muslims. So this is in the Journal of American Academy of Psychiatry Law in 1997, and that's a little easier to identify. I mean, there's bad actors in all groups of people, and the majority of physicians obviously are not involved in genocide. There may be a very small group that are, and this he was a former president of the Bosnian Serb Republic, a psychiatrist and a poet. So yeah, you're gonna obviously have individuals that fit this from the medical community, but there was a this is Holocaust Remembrance Day, I think on Monday. And then the History Channel had a long expose that I was watching the other day, one of the History Channels, and it talked about World War II and the Nazi planning for the concentration camps. And they had actually, from this particular documentary, and I didn't get a chance to research the validity, it said there were 15 doctors that were called in to a very tight, non-publicized meeting to discuss the modalities for the extermination of the people in this particular case, the Jews that were involved in the Holocaust, which of course went well beyond just the Jewish segments of the population. It was anybody that was opposed. And that was mentioned as well. And that, that was direct involvement apparently of physicians. And as you go to the medical code of ethics, that would have violated it because that's modern day. Benir, you had an excellent book, I believe, that you read, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. But the past occurrences in the 20th century, here's a list here. Bosnia was just mentioned, Rwanda, which we're talking about the 20th century, not the 21st century. Pol Pot, Cambodia, the Nazi Holocaust, Nanking, the rapes of Nanking, and China, Stalin's forced famine, Armenians in Turkey, and those are past occurrences that are listed. You can see the links to different sites to add for personal desire to look into it further. And this is an image that was online of the Armenian genocide. And it was a precursor to the genocide of in the 21st century, really, because it was the 20th century. And so I apologize for the mistake on the slide. The Armenian Assyrian genocide that took place between 1914 and 1923. And this describes how many individuals that were Armenians, certain sects of Christians, Greeks. This was the Turkish government as the last relic of 19th century nationalism. And they still maintain the denial that genocide ever occurred. Again, as someone mentioned, I think it was Harry W1HMM, history is sometimes written by the victors. So this particular case, those that were not the victors are not admitting it. So it's, of course, that's at odds with the historical evidence. There's a torrent of evidence that carried forth. So while it was not well known in the role of the doctors to genocide, there was another ominous precedent for the Holocaust. And this goes on to give the link. The article was Monstrous Complicity, Doctors in the Armenian Genocide, if one would want to look that up. And there's other articles that as we get into the 21st century, well, still in the 20th century, excuse me, during World War II, we've covered it in the Grand Rounds. And this is that link to the audio recording of the Grand Rounds. We talked about Nazi medicine and the ethics of human research. And we went into this extensively of WHO and the trials as part of an overall discussion on medical aspects of World War II. So it was in their ether, January 2024. There's a link to that edition. In addition, there's the audio recording, and I pass that along through links, through the slides I'll distribute to members. And then you'll be able to look at all that in more detail. And Munir, I'm going to turn the microphone over to you for the slide. You can see the screen capture of the book itself and your email and a little description of the book. But I wasn't even familiar with this book, Munir. So why don't you tell us a little bit about Man's Search for Meaning?
Yes, thank you, Jay. So I read this book the first time about, I don't know, 20 or 30 years ago, I can't remember. And I've reread it. It's a hard book to put down. Once you start, you have to finish it. It's a small book. It's not very big. It's small. Viktor Frankl has many other books. He was a neurologist / psychiatrist. I'm not sure how it was back then in Vienna. I guess there was no sharp delineation between the specialties. He had a visa to come to the USA, but he wanted to stay in Vienna to take care of his parents. So he made a conscious decision to stay in Vienna. He was taken to the concentration camp, I think more than one, but I think one of them was Auschwitz. And the first part of the book, he tells what he went through in the concentration camp. His style is very, very good. It's very clear. He doesn't use hyperbole, which makes it all the more poignant, I think. Almost like a clinician would describe what's going on there. Without going into details, there were some horrendous things happening in that camp. And of course, you only have to look at the history books to see what's going on. He had already an idea before he was in the camp about logotherapy, what he calls logotherapy. Now, when he was in the camp, they took the manuscript from him, together with his clothes, everything else. But then he was able to write on scratches of paper in shorthand some of the ideas. And when he came out of the camp, when he was liberated, he wrote the book. So difficult for me to describe. He's, like I said, I really think it's a very quick read, by the way. The various things that the prisoners were made to go through beyond what you and I would ever hopefully experience in our daily life, and difficult to understand. But then after he describes all the details, the starvation, the abuse, the overwork, the people who became like skeletons, people were taken to the gas chambers, some people died from typhus, other diseases, pneumonia. By the way, many members of his family also died, including his mother. He came up, or he developed further his philosophy of logotherapy. Now, the word logos in Greek, and I don't know Greek, but I know there are several meanings to the word logos. One of them is the word, as in the Gospel of John, in the beginning was the word. Another meaning, he says, is meaning. The word logos means meaning. We know it can mean knowledge, biology, psychology, etc. I think it also can mean reason or mind, but regardless, the way he uses it is meaning therapy. The therapy relies on meaning. It has three basic concepts. And sorry, I'm going to look at my notes here so I remember all of them. The first concept is freedom of the will. We are free to choose how we respond to life and are personally responsible for our choices. I know it's easier said than done. Some of his philosophy reminds me a lot of Stoicism, but I call it Stoicism plus. And I always say it's easy to say I'm a Stoic until something happens to me. Then we might not be as Stoic as we thought we were, okay? But he certainly was Stoic. There's no question about that. The other concept is the will to meaning. I don't know enough psychiatry or psychology, of course, but of course Freud, I think he had the will to pleasure, if I'm not mistaken, or the pleasure principle, and Adler had the will to power, and please somebody correct me if I'm wrong. Frankl had the will to meaning, which means you are motivated not just by pleasure, avoidance of pain, avoidance of suffering. You are motivated to find meaning. And when this search is thwarted, we have what's called an existential frustration and feeling of meaninglessness. And I think that's when we go to pleasure or excessive pleasure. Pleasure is good. I'm not saying it's not good, but excessive pleasure, not in moderation. The third concept is the meaning of life, that we are called moment to moment to answer the demands that life places on us. And I mean, if you want to call it a laboratory in a certain sense, the concentration camp certainly was, to see if his concepts hold up. And the way he sees it, there's no meaning that applies to everyone. I mean, there's not like the meaning of life. It's like, he gives an example in his book. You don't ask a chess player, what's the best chess move there is? Every situation might have a different chess move, right? But he says meaning can be found through three things: creations, like creating a work or doing a deed, essentially what we put into the world; experiences, goodness, truth, beauty, nature, culture, being loved. I like to add conscience, conscience. Essentially what we take from the world, and attitudes, essentially how we view the world, and I think that's very, very important. So, I read many, many years ago Epictetus and Marcus Aurelius, and they propounded the philosophy of Stoicism. This goes beyond Stoicism, because in Stoicism is almost always a detachment, like a cold detachment from suffering, from everything that happens to you. Epictetus was a slave, and his master was twisting his leg to punish him. And Epictetus said, if you keep doing it, you're going to break my leg. He kept doing it and he broke his leg. Epictetus coolly said, you see, I told you you're going to break my leg. So that's a kind of detachment. Marcus Aurelius, who was an emperor, of course, in the Roman Empire, also had a philosophy of Stoicism based partly on what was known of science back then, and also on detachment. Frankel, I think, is different in that, as you see, he adds goodness, truth, beauty, nature, culture, being loved, loving other people. He said one of the things that maintained him in the concentration camp and helped him survive. Now, of course, he said partly it's luck, of course, but partly he kept thinking of his love for his wife, and he kept thinking of his work that was unfinished. So I thought that book was very powerful. I've read it and reread it. And I think one of the things I like to add, there's a website called victorfrankelamerica.com, by the way. Something I find useful is, in addition to creating a work or doing a deed, goodness, truth, beauty, nature, culture, love, and being loved, and how we view the world. Sense of humor is very important. I know that it's not always easy to have a sense of humor in difficult times. The ability to learn from our mistakes, our passion for a cause. But I like to add something more: the joy of finding things out, learning, understanding. I mean, it's really like a blessing that humans have. I would like to briefly, if I can, one of the editions of his book, the foreword was by Harold Kushner. I'm sure some of you might have heard of him, would have heard of him. Franklin liked to quote Nietzsche. Now, Nietzsche has his followers and detractors, but regardless, Nietzsche said something that Frankel approved of. He who has a why to live for, can bear almost any how. So having purpose, having meaning in life. Now, by the way, as an aside, Frankel is not advocating suffering for the sake of suffering. They're not saying, be masochistic or go and hurt yourself just so that you can go through suffering. He's not saying that. He's saying unavoidable suffering can bring meaning to life. The other thing Kushner said, life is not primarily a quest for pleasure, as Freud believed, or a quest for power, as Alfred Adler taught, but a quest for meaning. The greatest task for any person is to find meaning in his or her life. And Frankel saw the possible sources for meaning in work, doing something significant in love, caring for another person, and in courage during difficult times. Again, easier said than done, but that's what it is. And then he said, Frankel's most enduring insight, one that I have called on often in my own life and countless counseling situations: forces beyond your control can take away everything you possess except one thing: your freedom to choose how will you respond to the situation. You cannot control what happens to you in life, but you can always control what you will feel and do about what happens to you. Sorry for all the quotations, but they do a much better job of explaining it than I ever can. That gave me a lot of hope. This was, I don't know, in the 1980s that I first read the book. That gave me a lot of hope and still does. Even Marcus Aurelius, if you go back to his meditations, can also give people a lot of hope, among, obviously other books and religious sources, the Bible and others. So this book had, it's often you hear saying, this is a life-changing book. This is a life-changing book. This one is a life-changing book, I think, in my opinion. So that's my take on this genocide thing. I like to read history. I've read some of the volumes by Will Durant. I don't know, he has like 12 volumes, I think. I read one and listened to 3 or 4 on Audible. And one of my favorite historians, Elizabeth Weisbauer, this genocide thing, unfortunately, has been happening since, I think probably before history was written. The Assyrians, the Babylonians, I mean, you name it, they used to pride. It wasn't considered a crime, by the way, back then. It was considered like a pride. You go and kill all the men, take all the women, raise the children as your own. I mean, that was considered like an achievement, a pride, and they would be considered heroes for doing that. Of course, our sensibilities have changed over the centuries and millennia, fortunately. So genocide is nothing new. It's a shame it's still happening in this day and age, which we're supposed to be enlightened. I don't know whether there is, I often think, why do we have to have wars? Why do we have to have people torturing other people? Why do we have to have this, I don't know, I want to call it beastly behavior, but honestly, my dogs don't behave that way. They never really do anything that bad. I can tell you that. So I don't know if it's beastly. Anyway, that's my take, that even in the darkest moments of your life, you have to have faith in something, whether it be religion, God, logotherapy, psychological, or I like to call it philosophical idea, really more than philosophical and psychological idea. I think it helps to have those ideas. That's what I wanted to say.
Thank you, Munir. Thank you. Appreciate that very extensive. You're obviously very well read on more than just history, because you're also quoting philosophy and philosophers. Marcus Aurelius being philosopher as well as a historical figure. Was there another comment? Asif, did you want to make a comment?
Yes, sir. One of the issues which I want to point out is this, and this entails a reference to the current situation without getting into the nitty-gritty specifics of that. And we had talked about the uh, um, participation of physicians and medical professionals in the acts of genocide. The other side is this, that side which should be considered, and it is very relevant, is the prevention of medical personnel from carrying out their duties and or destroying the facilities where they are supposed to be protected and to be treating everybody who are the victims of war, conflict, or genocide, or whatever you may like to call. And this has been happening very recently. And I am going to say that I am in what you call aware of situations. I have professional colleagues who have been in those situations that they have been trapped. And their frustration is that we are volunteers. We have nothing to do with whether we are part of the conflict or not. We are there to help anybody, especially the innocent civilians who are not part of the conflict. They are not military by any means, and they have been prevented from either working in those facilities, or those facilities have been deliberately targeted and destroyed. And last but not least, when they went to those facilities, they were either kidnapped or they were prevented from coming back. And obviously, many of them have been deliberately targeted, injured, and killed. That's all I got to say.
It's very, very pertinent what you're saying, and obviously current events as of right now can be related to that, although life is very complicated, and certainly there's other groups of people might have different points of view as to why that might be happening. What you just mentioned brings to mind something that happened in my life about 20 years ago, perhaps. I had a patient whose daughter was in Yemen at a medical facility, and she was having a severe dental emergency. And because of the politics at the time, she couldn't go to Israel for treatment. She wasn't Jewish, but just she was in a country where obviously she wasn't going to go there. And she decided, I made arrangements here at the University of Florida for her to be seen. So here she is. She came back, dealt with this facial pain issue at the University of Florida. And while she was here, the clinic that she was working on in Yemen, and this is when there was still, I guess, a North and South Yemen, politically a while ago, everyone was attacked and murdered. If it wasn't for her facial pain, she would have perished herself. Her dental emergency actually protected her life. So it has been going on. It's not just, right now. And we'll talk a little bit more towards the end about some current events and some different points of view. But again, that United Nations, I think, as if you might have come on either right after that, it's, words, when you define genocide, mean different things to different individuals. And you can read into the definition by the United Nations and see situations that put medical professionals at risk. And you can also see where the facilities would be at risk. Things like, whether or not abortion could be considered to be genocide. And I'm not trying to be controversial. I'm just, reading into the definition. So I appreciate you bringing those comments to the forefront. And let's continue on with that dialogue as we move on. As far as Munir, the book that Munir described, do we have any questions of Munir from our members? Is there anybody who would like to ask him a direct question? Let me know. I'll let you have the mic. Okay, Chip is a psychiatrist, and this, it looks like it was to a high degree about psychiatry. Please do go ahead and take the mic.
There, that one didn't work. Thank you for a wonderful presentation on that. The book I checked on Amazon while you were speaking. It's $2.99, so I went ahead and ordered it, and I will read it. I appreciate it.
We'll enjoy.
A couple of observations. One, there's nobody without some guilt. All of our ancestors ganged up to kill the Neanderthals. So there's nobody that's not involved in that genocide. The other thing, we haven't said much about religion, but it's very hard to find meaning in the life of the world without some religion. And in my belief, they're not all, equal. There are some that are better than others, and have a proven track record of helping people to find the answers to some of these questions. So that's me. N5RTI.
Okay, thank you, Chip. So from a psychiatrist, when you read the description of his book that you looked on Amazon, because I think I'd looked at some of it. Maybe I looked at the Wikipedia on the book, because I think it talks about the psychiatry of it, Chip. So on the Wikipedia. Munir, did you have a follow-up description?
Yeah. The Wikipedia article, I think it's a very good article, but I don't think it's all consistent. I don't know if it's written by more than one person. It's not, I don't think it's all exactly true, as far as I can tell, of course,
Oh, thank you. And that's our dilemma. Everything that's on the internet is not true. And you've got to go down to the nitty gritty of looking at the references and, vetting them. So Wikipedias are obviously not the best source. And now with ChatGPT, it's just pulling everything. I think it's getting even more muddled. But thank you for bringing that book to our attention. So what about this post-World War II, the Center for Study of Law and Genocide? I mean, we do have a center here in the United States that talks about these atrocities, and as the atrocities unfold, they're discussed. Look at Armenia even now. Armenians, I should say, in parts of Azerbaijan, if I'm pronouncing it correctly. Maybe I should give the call sign prefix, be easier to pronounce. But it looks like 1948 was the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. So is this a modern term? It appears that way. As Chip just said, it's been around forever, and it's just seemed like it was an accepted way of humanity. But after the atrocities of World War II, it's looked at a little bit differently. And they do still have meetings about the 21st century, seminars where people get together. United Nations, a collection of countries, talk about different viewpoints and different meanings for words, as if and here you got all these countries in the world getting together, forming the United Nations and trying to come up with some consensus of all the different collections of people and political countries, cultures, religions, and even within each country, of course, it's fragmented as to what is what. So we can see how complicated the subject becomes. Now, look what happened in Myanmar, in Burma. Rohingya, I don't even know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but I think this is well known in the media. Certainly gets a lot of attention. And ironically, I took that little segment from a wiki. Shame on me, Manir. But yeah, you gotta take it from somewhere.
The article was mainly great. Don't take me wrong, but I thought there were a couple of things that is not what I read in other places. That's all I'm saying.
No. I'm just joking myself, because here's another slide with a wiki excerpt. And certainly we wouldn't want our students to pull things from wikis and put them in academic papers. So yeah, the professors breaking the rules aren't very good. It's not a good situation. But look what's happened to that group of people within a country. So they're calling that genocide. It was a particular group that was targeted. What about defer in Africa? And that brings another philosophical discussion or political discussion. Or if you've got a group of people that's not considered to have the same value as the next group of people in the same geographic area, is that becoming genocide? And this is deferred genocide. You have a segment of the world that might have an anti-Black bend or in an Arabization type of an environment in this particular claimed case, at least the way that this one is described. I'm not giving a personal opinion. I don't know enough about it. But we certainly see in parts of Africa that the genocide seems to go on without the same level of response. Not to say that the people in World War II that were murdered deserved, more of a response, but you have equivalencies in the percentages of populations that are murdered and targeted. Do we get the same sympathy across the board? And perhaps as if that's something that you might want to comment on as we get further into the 21st century here. Currently, right now, here's the geographic area of Armenia, Azerbaijan, and you can see where it sits between the two. And that's just one example of many different countries where the political situation is shifting and the interpretations between groups of people clash and conflicts. And the Middle East has been a point of fighting, I guess, as far as back as millennia for sure. And then you throw the religious interpretations in there. And if everybody's going to be strict by their own version of history, it's going to be hard to rectify a situation. And there's a statement that they issued about the ethnic Armenians, and this has been in the news. You see it on the news coverage. So the 21st century, as we get into this, knowing the context, some of the context, and not trying to be controversial, and we can have this discussion. And I'm not sure what you were referring to as if with your friends being considered to be genocidal events in the past. Look at, for example, what's happening in Ukraine, what's happening in Gaza. Is there a medical ethics component, which, as Ziff just mentioned, with your friends, and I don't know if it involves Gaza or some other area similar, but I mean, obviously you've got physicians trying to help people, and that they consider their ethics to help other areas in humanity. And who's putting that population and the patients at risk? Is it the people that are attacking these facilities? Or is it because the facilities themselves are being used for other purposes? And, does that support or counter the arguments of the presence of genocide? It's very complicated. What's your take, as if, and did you want to expand more on your comments? Go ahead.
Yes, sir, I would do that. And I just wanted to point out that obviously, without being controversial, and don't take this as something which is my opinion, I'm exactly relaying the facts as I have witnessed them. I have heard firsthand from colleagues who are professional medical licensed physicians who have been to that area of Gaza, and they have told me and that we come under attack, we come under harassment by the attacking forces of the state of Israel, and I'm naming a country here, and some of your audience may feel very strongly about it, but this is something which has been already reported by the international agencies like Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, and other international organizations, including the International Criminal Court and in The Hague. So this is not my opinion. I'm just letting and sharing you guys know that this is what it is. I also happen to be here in North Carolina, which is the military base of Fort Liberty, which is called Fort Bragg previously. And we have information that obviously our country has been a strong supporter of the state of Israel, and we, unfortunately, whether we like it or not, are part and parcel of this inhumane act which has been going on. And we are we kind of tend to watch this thing on TV with a chuckle as if this is a crisis for another country, but it is very unfortunate that this is an inhumane treatment of a whole what you call population. And obviously what started this, I totally disagree with what this attack was on October 7. And again, I'm kind of treading into the political side of this, but I'm telling you that what the counter response was totally exaggerated and totally uncalled for. And obviously, this is the policy of the government in power at this time, which has obviously led to this massive humanitarian tragedy and crisis, which has been called by Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch and other groups as a genocide. So this is all I got to say. And obviously, lastly, I would say to you, as of yesterday, day before yesterday, there was a letter written to the new Secretary of State, Mr. Marco Rubio, appealing to get help in releasing about 14, 15 American physicians who are trapped in Gaza and are being prevented from leaving after carrying out their humanitarian duties. The Israeli government or the Israeli military has stopped them from leaving Gaza. I don't understand why they are becoming the pawns in this political game. So that is all I'm going to say at this time.
We appreciate, it takes a whole family to come together of our members here. And we're all, obviously going to view it in a little different vein. And I think your points are very well taken. I don't know if you saw the news today or read, I read this morning, and I don't know if this is threats for a different purpose, but it seems like there might be a push, or at least a threatened push, to repopulate the people from Gaza to another area because rather than rebuild. So I don't know if that's political pressure, trying to get that area to be demilitarized, or to force the population to change who their political leadership is in their local leadership is. But again, it's extremely complicated, and things seem to change day by day. And the words we hear don't necessarily represent the action's intent. And then we hear it from different, in terms of mass media, you hear it from different viewpoints, from different countries, from different political systems, from different populations with different religious backgrounds. And, you know, can everything be true? Yes. Can everything not be true? Yes. I'm not the arbiter of truth, but we certainly can't believe everything that we hear and see, and we certainly know what you say as if I'm sure there's a lot of truth in it. The question is the intent and why, but certainly some of the what we see in the media is changing rapidly, and every day the reports that you read, it's hard to keep up within a day, within 24 hours, how rapidly the chess game is being played as to what the final outcome is going to be, and whose king gets captured, or you know whose pawns get eliminated. I don't know. It's a sad state of humanity. So I'll just go to a little gentler and kinder. As a child of the late 1950s and 1960s, when I thought during the folk music generation that that we had a noble society, and Bob Dylan's lyrics of "Blowing in the Wind" meant something. You know, you wish it could be that simple. Yeah, you wish you could look up at the sky and see the stars or the clouds, and we don't seem to have an appreciation of the bond of humanity, and we're fragmented. I guess we really do need the aliens to come down and attack us so we can all bond together and fight them. I remember, didn't they have Independence Day? Weren't they in the deserts in the Middle East sending Morse code back to the United States? And they were all coordinating the response against the aliens. Wasn't that a famous scene in that movie? As if, do you want to comment some more? Go ahead.
Well, yeah, Jay, your points are well taken, but it is unfortunate that we as medical professionals are being manipulated by the political powers who are preventing help, and the people who are suffering unduly. The very, very vast majority of those population are absolutely innocent people who are caught up in the conflict. And obviously, I'm not going to get into the history and the dynamics of that. But again, this is from a medical standpoint, from a professional medical standpoint, it is totally uncalled for. And with the way social media and our news media is nowadays, we can instantly see within a minutes of what is happening or very shortly thereafter. So this has been an unprecedented episode of tragedy which has been unfolding in front of the American audience for the last 15, 16 months. It is worse than what happened in Bosnia in the 90s. It is worse than what has happened in the Congo, in the Central African Rwandan conflict. It is worse than what happened with the Rohingyas in Myanmar, with those people being driven out of Myanmar to Bangladesh. So there has been many instances of genocide besides what happened with the Second World War, Holocaust, and obviously there is no question that what has happened in the last 15, 16 months in Gaza cannot be classified as genocide. Let us not shy away from this fact and beat around the bush and pretend that we are only talking about what happened in Holocaust in the Second World War. That was absolutely a worst of the worst for humanity, where millions of Jewish people were, killed, and a lot of those survivors are scattered all over the world, settled all over the world, including in this country. But we have not, unfortunately, learned our lessons. Number one. Number two, we keep continuing to do these things and become part and parcel of these events. And obviously, we as medical professionals, coming back to us as medical professionals, our hands are tied by the so-called elected officials, and we pretend like, oh, we are helpless, we can't do anything to help them. We should actually be the ones who we should become the rebels and say, hey, we are going to do what is right for humanity, whether it is of any side, the opposite side or our side. We will do what is right for humanity. That should be our goal as keepers of the Hippocratic Oath.
That's a great point. That's a great point. It's because the Hippocratic Oath and the medical ethics from the ADA seem to just be the relationship between the patient and the doctor, your individual patients, and not take that into account, but those standards should apply. Carl, did you want to say anything, N0ARM, or would you like me to read your comments? Go ahead. No, and I think all of us, would prefer that the world was able to separate the color of one's skin and ethnicity and background, so that no groups, we wouldn't confuse religious motives trying to eliminate a group because of their skin color, place of birth, or color of hair, or color of eyes. There's just so many factors go into play. War is hell. So you get into a war environment, and it seems like all the rules are looked at. What one people interprets as intent is and the reasoning for their actions is not the next. And well, let's all pray, or if you're not religious, let's just all hope for a quick resolution, and that there is some way to make the lives better for all individuals involved. So that's a very controversial subject. I appreciate the very frank conversations. I feel the stresses every day myself, because I do have a number of Palestinian students, but I've had students also that are from the Donbass area back during the 2014 term, and you go in and start treating everybody equal and love them equally, and be dedicated to your students equally, and you see their families suffering, and it's just humanity. We went into our professions because we have a love for humanity, and we want to make sure we embrace that. Are there any other comments before we bring this to a close? I will distribute a video to our members, and we certainly can. We're not going to convene a convention on this, but I think everyone in our membership, as if the things that you expressed, everyone should hear the differing or our individual point of views, and they're not political views. And I know some of our members here are attorneys too, even though that's not their area, including some on today's call. But are there any other comments before we bring this to a close?
Yeah, Jay, I have a comment.
Okay, Jerry, go ahead.
Yeah, we talked about genocide as the starting point, and we came to at least I came to the conclusion that there is intentional and non-intentional forms of genocide, but then we went on to talk about what's the meaning of life. And for me, it's summed up in one word: family. Everything else is an adjunct helping achieve the goal of enhancing family. And therefore, I think maybe what we should hypothesize as a possible definition of genocide as being the indiscriminate mass destruction of family.
Thank you, Jerry. We certainly know that has happened in the conflicts that we're discussing. It's a very primal and important view, because when it affects you, it's 100% that you're being affected, and it doesn't. You've still got to consider everybody else's family too as well. Any other comments?
Well, just one thing real quick. I had referenced Will Durant, and one of his last books, he did not sound an optimistic note about humanity learning from their mistakes. I mean, again, who said he who forgets history, or I think, is doomed to repeat it? And unfortunately, we have learned over the millennia, but I think it's an ingrained thing in human beings, and it's of course a subject for another discussion. It's very, very, but so far, many people tried over centuries to bring peace, to do all kinds of good things. But so far, it seems we repeat the same things over and over. We can just pray for peace and hope for peace and love our fellow humans. I think love is very important.
Well said. Thank you. Any other input or comments, contributions before we finish up for today? This will be carried forth in some format into the Ether publication, and feel free to, on the Google group, to also express some questions or comments or others. The ethical dilemma of the physician's responsibility towards others, if it extends beyond your patients alone, that certainly could be a conversation of its own. So I think that's an excellent point, as if that's something that doesn't seem to be getting focused on. Thank you for bringing that up. Any other comments? Thank you for all being here today. I go tried. You hate to be controversial, right? We're not being controversial. We're a group of friends, and friends discuss topics, and we don't want to alienate each other. So please don't get offended if you think somebody got a little more mic time or affronted you. I mean, this is a very highly intelligent group that's capable of making their own personal ethical judgments, and let's consider that within our professions, and consider that maybe that's a discussion thread that should be discussed in the future. Thank you, guys. I'm going to go ahead and stop the Zoom recording at this time. If I can get to the screen where I do it. Hang on, I'm going to stop the share of the slides. I feel different here today, not having 20 meters. I really enjoy 20 meters. I wish we still had that capability for today. So I'm not even seeing here we go.